All right, good morning, colleagues, and apologies for the delay. It is forces beyond our control. There was a flight canceled last night, and Ms. Albanese was able to fly in only this morning. So I hope that you have time to stay. The proceedings will be as follows. Initially, the special rapporteur will give a briefing. We will then open up for questions. If time does allow, perhaps we can also offer some one-on-one interviews after we're done with the Q&A session. For colleagues joining online, there is a chat option of asking questions, and we'll read those out loud, so please don't be strangers online. So without further ado, welcome to UN City. We're happy to have you. So Francesca Albanese is the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967. And she is visiting Denmark this week, throughout the week until Friday, and we're happy to have you this morning. So without further ado, you have the floor.
Thank you. Gomor, I'm very happy to be with you today in Copenhagen, where I just literally landed, and apologize for being late. I mean, I don't break the stereotype of the typical Italian, let's put it this way. I have to say that I'm positively surprised to see the room pretty packed and so many of you here, given that I was quite negatively surprised to understand that just yesterday that two prominent media outlets in this country suddenly decided to cancel our long scheduled interview without any explanation and just our side of my visit. So I do think that, like in other countries, including my own, the Danish media ecosystem is not immune to pressure. But I guess I was wrong, and at least there are exceptions. So thank you very much for being here. Velkommen til alle sammen. Look, I have a dense program ahead this coming few days to talk about the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. Here at the request and invitation of a coalition of Danish civil society actors and grassroots organizations who have worked hard for months to prepare this visit. We are at a very interesting and dangerous crossroad. I think everyone senses it. After 15 months, the ceasefire in Gaza and the hostage mutual release, there are also prisoners, but also on the Palestinian side, there are many hostages. These offer a ray of hope, there is no question. However, the situation on the ground remains catastrophic despite all this. But let me start by putting the occupied Palestinian territory and my legal assessment in your mind. Last year, I concluded, after 6 months first and then 12 months of investigation altogether, that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Israel had committed acts of genocide in Gaza. I also said last year that Israel used what I called humanitarian camouflage, used to justify its operations in Gaza by using international humanitarian law jargon like human shields, collateral damage, safe zones, and evacuation orders in order to justify and to normalize the assault, the reckless assault on civilian life. And this has been used to camouflage acts of genocide. And in my second report, I argued that I had continued to document the attacks in Gaza, but also that the violence that we had seen in Gaza was leaking out across the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory. And this was part and parcel of a process of colonial erasure. The arguments that Israel wants to eradicate Hamas, whatever it means, or liberate the hostages, were not the main drive behind the wholesome destruction that Israel has unleashed against Gaza. As I warned on the 12th of October 2023, Israel would have tried to seize the opportunity to get more land and forcibly displace the Palestinian people. My words were prophetic, in an attempt to reproduce what some politicians called a second Nakba. And in the process, it has committed acts of genocide under the fog of war. Israeli public officials have openly advocated for a total erasure of Gaza and for forced displacement of Palestinians, as it had happened in 1947-49 and in 1967. All this to realize a state of Israel for Jews only from the river to the sea. This continues as we speak, because the genocide of the Palestinians is still ongoing. Just as it did not begin in 2023, we know that genocides are processes, not acts, not single acts. Genocide is a different crime than war crimes and crimes against humanity. We cannot look for the intent with the magnifier. We need to take a step back and see the intent, the intention to destroy a group as such, a people as such. And the past 15 months have led to the destruction, you know that already. I mean, I'm sure that I don't need to go through the list of data, the 70% of homes destroyed, no more universities, no more schools, few hospitals still standing and still decimated, unable to function. There is no possibility to resume normal life in Gaza. And plus, the people who now move across the rubble looking for the remains of their beloved ones, trying to give the dignified burial to them, or they are genocide survivors. They have survived 15 months of relentless bombing and killing, including through sniper fires. There is documentation of children who have been shot in the torso and in the head. And they have been living in tents without any access to water, any dignified access to water, shelter, food. And this is, I mean, these people need to be helped. This is what we should really absorb, that this is a population of genocide survivors and they need to be rescued before thinking of who's going to rebuild Gaza. Of course, Gaza is going to be rebuilt and will be rebuilt, but no one has the right to say how Gaza will be rebuilt other than the Palestinians. This is something that we need to absorb. And let me go fast forward. I'm shocked to see how little the international community, including countries in Europe, have registered the seismic paradigm shift that has been prompted by the ICJ, the International Court of Justice advisory opinion last year. The fact that it's an advisory opinion doesn't mean that it's not binding. It's binding because it's premised upon non-derogable norms of international law. This advisory opinion has concluded that the Israeli presence, not just the military presence, Israeli presence, both army and settlements, is unlawful. It is to be seized unconditionally and as soon as possible and totally. So Israel needs to remove whatever material, immaterial, tangible, intangible, civilian and military it has established in the occupied Palestinian territory. Full stop. And there is also a deadline for it to happen, the 13th of September this year. This is what the General Assembly has given as a time frame for Israel to comply. And you know why? Because the occupation crushes the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people. We Western people do not understand what self-determination is because we enjoy it, because we have it. Self-determination is the right to exist free as a people, to determine oneself as a people, politically, economically, culturally. This is something that the Palestinians cannot do under Israeli rule, including in the little that remains of their land. Gaza Strip, West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And let me remind everyone, this is the land that international consensus, I would say at least 192 states, minus Israel, things might change right now, but it might become 191. It's still okay. It's still international consensus. Recognize the right of exclusive rights of self-determination as stated to the Palestinians, which doesn't mean the Jewish people cannot live in the occupied Palestinian territory. If they want to live there, first of all, it will not be on stolen Palestinian land, and they will not be Israeli citizens. They will be under Palestinian law, as simple as that. Meanwhile, Israel needs to withdraw. And look, in the face of all these, and this will be my last comment, I'm also shocked by the defiance of toward international law, not just of Israel, but most countries in the international community, particularly the West, which has been preaching about compliance with international law with each and every country in the global South for the past decades. The ICC has issued arrest warrants on 2 Israeli leaders, 3 Palestinian leaders as well, and there be Hamas leaders as well, but they've been killed already. So there are 2 people who, and there should be more in my view, who are wanted by the International Criminal Court. And a number of countries have run forward in order to ensure that these people will be sheltered from accountability. So have fully embraced impunity. The International Court of Justice has concluded already in January last year that there was a plausible risk for the rights of the Palestinians in Gaza protected under the Genocide Convention, meaning it has recognized the plausibility of genocide, and it has issued not once, twice, 3 times provisional measures that have not been complied with, of course by Israel, but not just by Israel, because all member states, including Denmark, have clear responsibility toward international law. They should suspend all ties, especially economic and military ties with Israel. So the question you should ask your governments, if you have not done it yet, is what are you doing to comply with the ICJ advisory opinion, with the ICC arrest warrants, including by securing that there are all domestic mechanisms in place to investigate and prosecute anyone who might have committed crimes in the occupied Palestinian territory. It's regrettable that, in fact, the government in this country is moving, but in the opposite direction, because I understand that it intends to pass a law to make investigation and prosecution of the crimes committed in Palestine, and trust me, it will be applied elsewhere, more difficult. So guys, as someone who deeply believes in human rights and justice, I firmly stand against this lawlessness and encourage the government of Denmark to comply with its obligations, to stop doing anything that translates into aiding and assisting Israel's unlawful occupation, apartheid regime, and recently an ongoing genocide. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's open up for questions. I would take questions in the room first and then online. Please use the mic as you pose your questions. If I could ask you to state your name and the media outlet you're with. Yeah, so starting over here in the front row.
Thank you, Francesca. I am Michelle Rasmussen from the Executive Intelligence Review in the United States. And I have 2 questions. The first is, I have a question about implementing an Oasis Plan for peace through economic development and connecting a political solution to an economic solution. Because my magazine back, and its founding editor, Lyndon LaRouche, back in 1975, came out with an Oasis Plan for cooperation between an independent Palestine, Israel, the regional countries, and now also possibly including the Chinese, for water desalination, new water transfer canals, and basic modern infrastructure. So do you think that something like this could help break the cycle of violence and hate by creating a future vision of cooperation for the benefit of everyone, which could help pave a path from genocide to peace and give people hope? Because you said in a recent interview that what we do for Palestine is a test for humanity. Of what we want to do next. So could you comment on the need for international cooperation for reconstruction and economic development including something like an Oasis Plan to ensure a decent future for Palestinians? Then I have a second question, if it's possible.
You want to have a couple, or
Yeah, I can take a couple of questions. And,
let's have the other one.
Okay. The other question is, of course, what do you say to President Trump's statement yesterday that the United States should take over Gaza Strip and throw out all the Palestinians?
I was waiting for this question. Before being the special rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory, I've devoted a decent number of years to the question of Palestine as a UN official first, and then as a scholar. And I know the question of Palestine through the perspective and through the story, the experience of its people. Palestinian refugees. In fact, we shouldn't call them Palestinian refugees. We should call the Palestinians Nakba survivors, because this gives, for the Palestinians, the fact of being a refugee is not just being having it's not just a matter of legal status. It's a matter of having been deprived of a homeland that, as Edward Said used to say, existed one day and is no more. And so as such, I can tell you, for decades, the international community has treated the question of Palestine as something that could be managed in perpetuity through means of development, economic incentives, and encouraging growth, whatever it means. Or managing it as a humanitarian crisis. And frankly, after, let's say, at least 56, 57, but in fact it's 76 years, it doesn't work. And you know why? Because of course economic development must happen. Of course cooperation is necessary, but not at the expense of fundamental rights and freedoms, which is what Israel, the United States, more openly than ever, and others seems to expect that the Palestinians will accept. Like all indigenous people in the world, the Palestinian will never surrender. They will fight and they will resist. I mean, when I say fight, I do not mean armed resistance. They will fight for recognition of their rights and their dignity. And so, no. The short answer is no. Economic peace through economic development is expectation of surrender, and it will not work because everyone has the right to be free and to, again, self-determination as a people. This is a collective right.
My question was including a sovereign Palestine.
Well, but this is not what has been talked about. I mean, the argument of sovereignty is used as a rhetorical one. I mean, just to kick the can in the air, because then when it comes to, the only thing that is to be done to allow a Palestinian state is not to fund, excuse me, Ambassador, is not to fund the Palestinian Authority, is not to tell the Palestinian Authority how to reform. This is not of our business. We don't go to other countries telling them, we should probably in some countries advise people whom to elect. You're from the US, right? And we don't do. So the same thing applies to the Palestinians. I mean, the only thing we need to do to ensure that the international community needs to do to ensure a Palestinian state is to make sure that Israel withdraws troops, settlements, controls over resources. As simple as that. There is no other way around. The rest is hypocrisy. And frankly, the world has had enough of it. So no, it's not going to happen. And so the next point you are raising is economic development going to break the cycle of violence? No. No. I mean, and if there is one thing that I'm 100% sure of, the answer is no. And this is, what happened in the last 15 months, what happened 15 months ago, and what has happened over and over, the violence in Palestine, and let's be very, very, very blunt. Palestinians, they are not violent people. They are people who want to live in peace and freedom. And the fact that they might have resorted to violence at various points and they might have committed crimes against the Israelis during 76 years of dispossession and displacement is to be read as mirroring the violence they have been subject to. So the only way to stop this cycle of violence is to give peace a chance through freedom, through full recognition of freedom. And this is not going to bring to a decent future for the Palestinians only. For the Palestinians and the Israelis, I always have tried to have this inclusive language because there are few Israelis who are fighting against genocide, against occupation and against apartheid, and they should not be invisibilized. They are an important actor in the process. President Trump, where to start? The short answer to your question is what he proposes is utter nonsense.
Is what?
Utter nonsense. Is nonsense. And it's unlawful. What he proposes, people talk of ethnic cleansing. No, it's worse. It's worse. It's forced displacement. Is inciting to commit forced displacement, which is an international crime. Forced displacement and further dispossession, and in the context of a genocide, it will strengthen the complicity in the crimes that Israel has been committing over the past 15 months and before. It's unlawful, immoral, and irresponsible. It's completely irresponsible because it will make the regional crisis even worse. And I truly hope that people will stay calm, will not panic, and will remember that the international community is made of 193 states. And this is the time to give the US what it has been looking for, isolation. But this is the opportunity to revive or to give a meaning to cooperation premised upon respect of basic rules. Like international law is there for a reason. And look, as there is The Hague, I don't know if you have followed the initiative launched recently by nine countries in The Hague Group, a number of states who have committed to implement basic measures to ensure accountability and end of impunity in the occupied Palestinian territory. This is a model that others should follow. And I truly hope that Denmark, who has been very principled on other matters, on other regions of the world, joins the group and the initiative.
Thank you, Ms. Albanese, for being with us today. And I would start first by acknowledging and revere your position that has been always very consistent with the facts on the ground. People think that you are biased for the Palestinians, but in fact, you have been the most pragmatic rapporteur that we have ever seen since 2022. And saying this, let me start by a premise which is going to shock the people here when it comes basically to the resolution of this conflict. I believe that today Palestinians and Israelis are stuck between the historically inevitable and the politically impossible. And we relied on the international community to shoulder the two-state solution which has been adopted since 1994 as a result of the Oslo peace process. And unfortunately, the United States, that were supposed to be the honest broker of peace, became a total partisan in trying more or less pushing the agenda of the Israelis over the Palestinians. And of course, the Americans have lost their credibility, not only among the Palestinians, but among even the Arab world. And today we have a president that I would consider daringly a bully, who is trying to bully the entire world for achieving national interest to the United States. He deals with the Palestinians as if we are ants. He could, move us from Gaza, rebuild Gaza, make it Singapore, a place where the Americans could thrive, economically, without paying attention that the Palestinians' struggle for self-determination is the 14th article of a president called Woodrow Wilson, where the international community have practiced that right, except for the Palestinians, which is considered to be today one of the longest modern occupation in history. And we have seen the onslaught of Trump, let alone Biden, on the agencies of the United Nations, especially UNRWA. And the recent onslaught on UNRWA to close down their offices in Jerusalem is a sign that there is no right of return for the Palestinians. This is killing the refugee issue, and this is what they're trying basically to do. The United States wants to eradicate the Palestinian problem by forceful diasporization, by displacement, by ethnic cleansing, and by supporting Israel to basically control that part of the world with a close proximity of interests of the United States in the region. And today what we are witnessing in the Middle East is a dramatic, draconian changes that is going basically in the wrong direction. And this is partly of the non-unity of the Arab countries, where they are fractionalized in their positions when it comes to US policy in the region. And I think if we cannot get united with the Europeans and with other countries, and today the threats of Trump, for Europe in terms of tariff, Canada, and what have you, all these signs, if it proves something, it does not prove the Pax Americana that we wanted to see back in the 1990s. We are seeing a total hegemony, a new imperialism that been basically trying to impose its position on the world and trying to unilaterally rule over the world through its hegemonic processes. And of course, as you are a human rights lawyer and you represent the United Nations and you are very well spoken on this issue, to what extent do you think you, coming from an Italian background, from European, you could have a certain kind of impetus, I would say, on the European countries to start moving? Because we cannot see any kind of change coming from the Middle East itself. It has to come from the Europeans, who are considered to be the natural allies of the United States. And in particular, I would like to see the government of Denmark talk the talk and not walk the walk. And this is what is happening today, where they are totally submissive to that of the diktat of American policies in the region, regardless of their position in terms of human rights and in developing Palestinian infrastructure. But we don't see a clear position on the decimation, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians by this government, which is considered to be a rightist government. And that's why I think, it's about time that we have to shoulder our responsibilities as an international community. We have to push for the International Criminal Court justice resolutions, and we have to continue our struggle democratically and not by using violence. Violence is rejected by the Palestinians, and I speak in terms of the authority of the Palestinians. We are against violence. We don't believe that violence is going to bring our rights for self-determination, but it's through political accommodation, and we have done that in 1988 when we had our historic compromise, painful compromise, in accepting Israel on 78% of the land and accepting 22% of the remaining of Palestine. And this is our position. We believe that through pragmatism, through political accommodation, through negotiations, as recent US presidents have promised us, where we can see the oxymoron represented in President Trump that negates all kinds of agreements in the past and opens a new avenue for a continued conflict in the Middle East. Thank you very much for your presence, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Ambassador. There was a question in there, but let's have another one, also in the interest of time.
Yeah. We can also take more questions so that...
Yes. Thank you. My name is Usama. I'm from Jordan News Agency. I have a couple of questions. You started by saying that a couple of Danish media channels cancelled their arriving here. I've been with you. So my question, how do you describe the Western media coverage of what's happening in Gaza and the occupied West Bank now? That's the first question. Being in Denmark, my second question is, how would you, what's your message to the Danish government regarding the ICJ resolutions and regarding that Denmark is exporting weapons to Israel?
Mm-hmm.
So we have 3 questions in there.
Yeah. First, a comment. Whatever the Israel's ambitions in destroying UNRWA, again, which is another abysmal phenomenon which shouldn't happen, because UNRWA is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly. Only the General Assembly can decide the future, the mandate, or the cessation of the agency. So if Israel, the United States, and other member states who are defunding UNRWA are against the continuation of the agency, they need to go through and respect UN law and go through the General Assembly, not operate outside the system, because this is unlawful. But however, it will not kill the right of return, simply because the right of return is established under international law that predates the creation of the State of Israel. So this is something, that people need to absorb. The impetus I can give to European countries as a person, look, my role is pretty limited in the sense that the United Nations expects me to monitor, report on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory and produce a legal assessment. So to assess the human rights situation, which, as I said, is catastrophic. And of course, I make recommendations. I've done the utmost to deliver my mandate in the most effective way, which is making sure that people listen. And what I think I might have helped Palestinians especially, but also the Israelis to stand with them for a non-apartheid land between the river and the sea, is to make sure that people understand the framework. It's not what we should stop calling what happens in that land as a conflict, unless we understand that it's a conflict of a very specific nature, which happens in a settler colonial paradigm, where Israel let aside its foundations, etc. But since 1967 has actually pursued and steadily pursued policies to acquire the control over the land that remained of Palestine and displace its people, its residents, its inhabitants. And this is what settler colonialism is about. And of course, as history should tell us, if we bothered to look at it and learn from it, is that settler colonialism is intimately, quintessentially genocidal, because it will result sooner or later in the annihilation of the indigenous people if succeeds. Look at the United States. The United States is a country birthed from a genocide. Many genocides, in fact, as Native American scholars teach us. Many genocides. And so there have been many genocides in Latin America and in Africa. This is our history as a European. Denmark has its own. Of course, there are major colonizers, but and Denmark has its own history. But it's so probably you don't feel that responsible for the past, but it's our European past, and so we should do better today. So this is what I aim to do: continue to bring attention to the facts, the context, the history, and what are the international law obligations. And here, let me move to then I will go back to what I think of negotiation. It's a risky argument. But the question of what is my message to the Danish government? First of all, my visit aims to speak to whomever wants to listen. And I think that those who want to listen the most here, considering the demand, is the Danish people. So the point and the message is, my ask to the government is, please respect international law. You have clear international law obligations. Under the law of state responsibility, Denmark is called upon not aiding and assisting an internationally wrongful act. And Israel maintains an occupation which, as I said, is ontologically illegal. So the Danish government should explain, should reveal all the ties that it maintains with Israel, diplomatic, political, military, strategic, research-wise, and should suspend anything that, according to the ICJ advisory opinion, is found potentially detrimental to the rights of the Palestinians. And therefore is the minimum is to suspend the arms trade, arms deals with Israel. Not to sell, not to buy. This is, and this is something that the International Court of Justice has also reminded member states in the context of the genocide case. There are 2 cases pending before the ICJ. South Africa versus Israel, and then Nicaragua versus Germany. And in the latter, the court has reminded member states of their obligations not to transfer arms, not to have arms deals with countries which are committing violations of the Genocide Convention, but also the Geneva Conventions. So first of all, there is this responsibility that Denmark will continue to have, even if it tries to circumvent international law and change its laws so as not to comply with it. It will still be a stain on Denmark and will continue to violate international law, whatever the national escamotages are. And then the thing that I want to say to the Danish people is not just your state that has obligations toward international law. Also businesses, private actors. I don't know if it's the case here as in other European countries, but there are double nationals, individuals with Israeli nationality who have committed crimes or who might partake into crimes as individuals, as settlers, as business people who have dealing in the colonies. Well, they should be investigated and prosecuted. And also charities, pension funds, banks. I'm investigating right now the complicity of the private sectors in that monstrosity that Israel has set up in the occupied Palestinian territory. And I'm telling you, there are quite a few businesses, including located in these countries, that I'm investigating, including, it's no secret, Terma and Maersk. It's very complicated. So these businesses should be
Including what?
Maersk and Terma. I'm carrying out an investigation right now. I will do the utmost to also get in touch with these businesses, like other European businesses that I'm investigating. And but again, what I want to say to the lawyers in this country is act, because it's also your job to make sure that justice starts at home. And also, ordinary people have a responsibility. There has been a silencing, and I go to the other question. The role of the media in general in the West has been unprofessional, unethical, to say the least, in the sense, not only facts have not, and I don't speak of the Danish media, because I do not know the Danish media enough. I can only tell you that the Danish media is not immune to cancel culture, given the fact that, again, two important media outlets who had scheduled interviews long time ago with me, cancelled yesterday. So that there is this tendency of not to host, not to give a place, so that the voice is heard. And this is, frankly, pathetic. It's so sad, because in any case, my voice is going to be heard anyway. So it's their loss. But the point is, not only the media have not told the story, they have chosen which story to tell, not telling the facts, not giving context, for example, to what has happened on October 7, which doesn't mean justifying the crimes that have been committed against Israelis. absolutely, which I've condemned, and I've called for justice for all the victims. So, but there is a context, and that context has often been missed, and also it has been, what has followed has been misrepresented. The Palestinians are by default referred to as terrorists, and while terrorism is an act, cannot be an individual, independently from what the acts, the operations or the ideologies. And also the Western media have amplified the Israeli propaganda. Israel lies, and it's fully documented by commission of inquiries after commissions of inquiry. And this notwithstanding, facts have disappeared and international law has been completely sidelined. That's very unprofessional. But also, I think that there is something worse, because again, there is a genocide, and then there is increasing consensus that there is a genocide ongoing. And like in other genocides, media do play a role. So is the work that international tribunals have revealed in the case of Rwanda, for example, in the case of former Yugoslavia. What is shocking here is that the international media has made itself complicit. It's not just the Israeli media, and not all of them, of course. There are wonderful journalists in Israel, and thanks to them we know a lot, for example, of how an artificial intelligence has been used to kill hundreds and hundreds of civilians in Gaza at the time. So there should be a study and an investigation on how the Western media have acted in the context of this genocide. One last comment is in connection with the negotiation and the pragmatism. As I said before, sure, but neither negotiation nor pragmatism cannot happen at the expense of fundamental rights. The Palestinians should not be negotiating their right of self-determination. The right of self-determination should be the departure. Once the right of self-determination is realized in the form of statehood as the starting point, then there is negotiation on the relations that Israel and Palestine will have. And one day maybe they will decide, the Israelis and the Palestinians will decide to live happily together, who knows, but the realization of the state is the ground zero that should be pursued.
All right, another question here?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Claire McCarthy. I'm a journalist from Ireland, which, as you know, is one of the few places to have recognised the sovereignty of Palestine, and which is working on making it illegal to import things from the settlers. And in that, my government has access to exactly the same intelligence reports as do all the other governments of Western Europe. They know the same stuff. They know more than we've seen on our television screens. So my question would be this: what explains the reluctance of other Western small countries or big countries to do the morally correct thing? And that is to recognise the absolute right to self-determination of the Palestinians, and to recognise the genocide for what it undoubtedly is. Thank you.
Any more questions? We want to conclude around past. I don't want to hear.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Afia. I would like to ask about the West Bank. Francesca Albanese, you have made a report in late October, among else warning that the genocide of Gaza may be spreading to the West Bank. And now, precisely after the ceasefire has taken place, we seem to have seen a major escalation in attacks and violence and assaults, and even blowing up of houses serially in the West Bank, something which seems to be a kind of Gazification of the West Bank. What is your view of this situation?
Thank you. And there is another one, yeah?
I'm James Brooks from AFP. Given Trump's comments, what's your thoughts on the next stage of negotiations, ceasefire negotiations?
Okay, Ireland. Well, I think that Ireland is a case in point in the sense that I do not think that it's one of the few states that recognize Palestine sovereignty. It's one of the few states in Europe which speaks to the hypocrisy of European countries. Because on the one hand, they keep on saying, on reciting the mantras of the two state, but then they don't do anything to make sure it happens. So what I think, this is why I say we are living an historical moment. We might not realize what's happening, but the masks have fallen and the hypocrisy is fully exposed, and this might propel changes in the way the rest of the world interacts with Europe. Because even that pretense of compliance with international law, that pretense of morality has gone down the drain. And I live in the global south. I move and work across various countries in the global south, and I can tell you that that sense that was also probably a legacy of decades and centuries of colonialism, of primacy of the West and Europe, is gone, and I'm perfectly fine with it. Although, I mean, as a European, I resent it. I would like us to be better, to do better, and we can still do better. I will get to this, but so I do think that Ireland, in as much as has done a lot and has been very vocal, especially because of the people, has still some way to go to give full meaning to the recognition of, to full compliance and to ensure full compliance with international law, because there are still, the settlement bill has not been passed, and recently Ireland referred to the fact of its referred to a commitment to endorse the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which I think shocked everyone, if even Ireland does it. But again, this goes to the why. Why Western states in particular, and there is not just the West, this also applies to many countries in the rest. Why these countries do not comply with their basic obligations under international law? Because Palestine is very specific. Palestine is the state of exception, and Israel has enjoyed impunity like no other state, probably than the United States, in the world. So this is the thing. Israel is, on the one hand, an extension, is the remnants of Western colonialism. It's not considered a Middle Eastern country by the Israelis itself, first and foremost, or any other country. It's seen like a prolongation of Europe. White, non-Muslim Europe. This is the reality. And of course, I know that many Israelis are not Europeans, but I'm simplifying to say there is this cultural affinity on the one hand. So Israel has projected itself like the bulwark to protect European Western civilization against these orders of savages. Again, this is a colonial language, and the thing is that this colonial language and colonial mentality has a lot of buy-in in our culture, in our European culture. This is something we need to work on. And the thing is that, so it's partly cultural, it's and a lot of it has to do with geopolitical and economic interests. There is a piece of work that I strongly recommend everyone to read by Anthony Lowenstein, Palestine Laboratory. It's one of the most brilliant investigations I've come across on Israel-Palestine, because it really exposes the deep, intimate, real nature of Israel as a military state, a state that produces military services, techniques, intelligence, and weapons, and has historically used the Palestinians, first and foremost, Palestine as a laboratory to test all these, and then to sell its techniques, services, and weapons to all over the world, including many dictatorships. Israel has been in a way, it's not in a technical sense, but the subcontractor of the US to sell weaponry. This is what Anthony Lowenstein reports in his book, to countries to sell weapons and other strategic services to countries that it would have been inconvenient for the US to trade with, like dictatorships in Latin America, like Chile and Argentina, but also countries that have committed genocides, like Guatemala, Rwanda, and former Yugoslavia. This is all documented, including by Israelis. There is an Israeli lawyer who has done exceptional work on this. So, because many countries buy these services, buy these techniques, buy these tools, the drones, the weaponry from Israel, it's difficult to break that relationship. And this is where our focus, our attention needs to be. The discussion concerning anti-Semitism, it has nothing to do with real anti-Semitism, which is disgusting and still exists. It's still a Western problem. But the reason why anti-Semitism is used so much in the current times is to deflect the attention. The accusation of anti-Semitism is to deflect the attention from the reality that Israel is coming under scrutiny for its military nature and the human rights implications of it. Gazification. Sorry. I should have mentioned the West Bank more in my presentation. Look, since October last year, I've been warning the international community that there were discernible patterns of conduct that Israel had deployed in the West Bank that reminded what Israel was doing in Gaza. And I've been looking at the shoot to kill policy that has been used since October 7 more and more by the army and the settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which has killed now in 15 months around 870 Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem alone. These numbers are shocking. 200 of these are children. There are over 9,000 Palestinians from the West Bank who have been arrested and detained and often tortured and apparently many of them raped while in detention. This is something that is shocking. It has happened to the Palestinians in Gaza, but it has also happened to the Palestinians in the West Bank. And also the other trait, the other feature I documented is that there has been a strategic destruction. This is what I told the General Assembly in October, of essential civilian infrastructure, like homes, assaults on hospitals and health facilities, medical professionals, and water infrastructure, energy grids, etc. Why? To make life of the Palestinians more and more difficult, to create conditions of life that might lead, in my view, to the destruction of the Palestinian people. So why I didn't conclude that there were acts of genocide identifiable in the West Bank, this is the trajectory. And because we know that genocide is a process, and because we know that genocide doesn't distinguish, genocide is an assault, it's an aimed annihilation, aimed destruction of a people as such, of a group as such. So it doesn't matter if the Palestinians are in Gaza or in the West Bank. They are targeted for ethnic cleansing, and in the process Israel is committing genocide. So let me say, this is why we don't need to conclude that Israel has committed acts of genocide in the West Bank, but what it has done as of the beginning of the ceasefire in Gaza is telling, because the fighting machine has just shifted from the Gaza Strip toward the West Bank. In one day, Israel has detonated 24 buildings simultaneously. This is not just a war crime. You need to read the totality of conduct against the totality of the people, in the totality of the land that Israel wants for itself. This gives you the sense of why this is genocide and why this is a settler colonial genocide. And then up to the court to determine where certain acts have been, if the court wants to take that local approach to say, oh, in Jabalia we had genocidal attacks and not in Derbala, for example. In Gaza there have been genocidal attacks everywhere, but in the West Bank. But again, we have an obligation, member states have an obligation to prevent genocide. And therefore, what's happening, these similarities should be a warning and prompt action, but nothing is moving. And the question after the Trump declaration, what is going to happen? Let me be hopeful, so to close on a positive note. Again, as I say, I know that this is going to generate panic across the world because it bears huge consequences. We live in a world where the United States are ingrained in our politics, in our lifestyle, in everything we do, in our economies. So this influence is hugely felt, and no one alone will be able to stand against the United States. But this will be the default option. I mean, it will be either subservience, a world made of vassals who abide by this lawlessness and nonsense that is being propagated, and the other will be to take a principled stance and say enough, so start disengaging. And again, I want to hope that the American people first and foremost come back to senses and oppose this system from within. It might not happen, so it's up to the other 191 member states to fix this. And again, it's the entire world, so it should make us feel stronger rather than be fearful. We can do better. This is the opportunity to do better.
Ms. Albanese, thank you so much for your
Thanks.
time this morning. I also want to thank you, dear colleagues, for sticking around in spite of the delay. Like I said to begin with, there is an option of having one-on-one interviews, if you so please. Mrs. Albanese does have a bit of time on her hands. I would allow for you to have a 5-minute break.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, you're good? Okay. So please approach me if you would like a one-on-one interview. Otherwise, thank you for coming out and have a great day.
Thank you.